Hello, fiends, friends, and familiars. This is your pal Matt Orozco from Macabre Daily here, and I am joined by two gentlemen who I don't think need much of an introduction, but I'm going to give them one anyway. We have comic book author, and novelist Steve Niles, and we have comic book author, screenwriter, producer Rodney Barnes here as well to talk about their newest project, Kolchak Meets the Classic Monsters. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Like I was telling you about, this is kind of a big bucket list item for me. So I'm going to try and hold my nerves together. But I've got a handful of questions for you about this amazing project you're working on with Monstrous Books. And by the way, before I get too much into it, you can still fund the Kickstarter. It's open until November 8th. You all have already blown through your goal, which is amazing to see. But the more, the better, because that means that we'll get more support for this kind of continuation in the future. So please, folks watching, listening, go and support this. But the question for you both, and I'll start with you, Rodney, then you to you, Steve. Why is now the right time for the return of Carl Kolchak?
I don't think Kolchak has really gotten his due. I don't think there's ever a wrong time for more Kolchak. I think, of course, the heyday for television for him was the 70s,
Right.
and touched on him a little bit in the 2000s in the remake. But I think what Moonstone and now Monstrous has done has given him a new life. I think a new generation of folks to embrace the stories and the adventures of Carl Kolchak. And I think it's just a genius idea to take the classic monsters and pit Kolchak against them. When is that a wrong time? When is that a bad time to get more Kolchak? You tell me.
I don't think there is any, but if there's someone that believes that, they're certainly out there, and I hope they find me and tell me. But
Yes.
Steve, what's your thoughts on why this is the best time for Carl Kolchak to reemerge?
I agree with Rodney. I mean, I'm a lifetime fan. I've thought about him ever since, I was a little kid. He's influenced, Kolchak has influenced a lot of my work. And now, I mean, they still run the movies and the shows, and they hold up. They hold
Yeah.
up great. I mean, they're so fun. So I think, it's a great time, especially to do stuff that he's never done before, like this, going up against classic monsters.
Yeah, it almost feels like it's about time. Carl Kolchak and Darren McGavin on TV has always brought a lot of, there's never been anyone like Kolchak, I guess, on film or television. Maybe the closest might be a John Constantine, but that's more supernatural in nature and less investigatory. So, you know, as you both think about your love of the monsters, Steve, we were talking a bit before the recording about your love of Frankenstein, but of course, all the classic monsters. So, what was your approach that you were taking to bringing Frankenstein to the page this time around with Kolchak?
I did sort of an amalgamation of all the various monsters that are out there, because you have the novel and you have the movies, and they're very different.
Yeah.
So I sort of based the creature a little more on the novel, and some of his supporting characters are from movies. So I love all the incarnations pretty much. So it was great to try to get all those together and get him into the story up against Carl.
Yeah, I love. We were talking a little bit before about Bernie Wrightson, and I love his interpretation of Frankenstein's monster. Rodney, I know you have recently, or not too long ago, revitalized another legacy vampire, Blackula, with
Mhm.
Jason Statham Alexander. And so I'm wondering, kind of how did you approach Dracula this time around, knowing that you've had that in the purview?
Similar to what Steve said, but for me, I love the 70s. So when I was talking to James Aquilone about Dracula and setting Kolchak in this story in the 70s, I'm thinking of the Scorsese 70s with the burning garbage cans. And, I guess John Carpenter
42nd
could take
Street.
some of that. Yeah. And, the Warriors, those movies where there's the hard New York and Times Square doesn't look like the Times Square of today. Um, there was something about in the TV series when Carl would get in his drop top and he would be riding around and you see the lights of the city in the background and all of that stuff. Um, stick a vampire in there and you got Carl Kolchak running around. I'm 9 years old again. So anything that can make me feel younger, I still have the same aches and pains. I wish we could find something to take that away. But to put Kolchak in the 70s and Dracula and all of the stuff that I loved about New York together, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's just the perfect kind of catalyst for a lot of these classic monsters to thrive in. And as far as uh, Kolchak's not a character that some horror fans will know right away. Sure, with some investigation, you could easily access the Night Strangler, Night Stalker. Those are out there available. But what can fans of Kolchak expect from you both? But also, what can people who maybe haven't heard of him expect from this that will bring them into the fold?
Well, I'll go with that. He's just a great character, and he's very different than a lot of monster hunters in that, he's not just out to kill, he's out for the story,
Right.
and the killing or the hunting sort of comes as an aside because nobody else will do it. So, I try to keep that in mind when doing the stories, and I think it's really going to appeal to people. They're good monster stories.
That's a brilliant answer, A. And B, I think it's funny when you mentioned Constantine a moment ago. There's a quality that Kolchak has of that's innocence that's sort of directed right to genre. It feels like it fits, like Kolchak fits these types of stories better than any other character. I know a lot of people have tried to make the monster hunter, the investigator, this. I've tried a couple of times myself, but nothing hits the way that Carl does. And, again, it's just an honor to be able to play in the space.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think a lot of that just has to do with Darren McGavin's performance as Kolchak. It
Yes.
sticks with you so much.
Yes.
And
I
it's
hear that
so,
voice. I hear that
right?
voiceover in my head as I'm writing. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think Steve, you hit it on the head there with him being a reporter. He's a reluctant monster hunter. What he's really out is for the story and to see and to go figure out, what's going to sell papers. So
Mhm.
I
Right.
do think that conflict, it's not even a conflict of interest, more just kind of his reluctancy is by nature of the work he's doing.
Yeah, and he usually winds up doing it because nobody else will.
Yeah.
Yep.
The police won't listen, his boss won't listen, he can't get the story done.
He's
Uh,
jeopardizing his job, along the
exactly.
way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's almost like Peter Parker in that sense, albeit without the superhuman powers. He's always trying to get the right stories pushed through.
Yes.
Um, and when you think about working with the artists you all have had a chance to partner up with here, what's that collaboration process like? And you have some really great names like George Quadros, Zac Atkinson, Alex Linz. So how much collaboration goes on during the writing and creation process between you all and them?
Well, for me and Alex, we worked together before on a couple of things, and it's really collaborative. I mean, I run the story by him first in order for him to be able to get an idea or his own version of what it is that I said. Like even talking about Scorsese's 70s, that gives him sort of he's creating a character of the environment in his head. And we have those conversations. And then, Lord willing, there's a script that lives up to those conversations.
Yeah, I was a little different because I actually wrote the script before we knew who the artist was going to be, before they hooked me up with George. So it's sort of been after the fact. I wrote a very descriptive script, which I don't usually do, because I usually know the artist and you have a shorthand going. But with George, I was a little more, I really wanted to nail the 70s of it,
Right.
so, make sure, because it just, I love, like Rodney said, I just love the 70s. Brings back a real nostalgia for me. But I also like the low tech of it.
Yeah.
That makes it a lot of fun to write. No cell phones. Oh,
Nope.
yeah.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview with another filmmaker along a while back, and he mentioned something that he doesn't like to work in modern times because there's so much to account for. And then, when you go back a couple decades, you kind of remove some of the need to be authentic because you have the limitations of technology, or rather what it's not capable of quite yet by going back. And, I love to see that Kolchak's maintaining this kind of 70s tone because I do think that that's part of the appeal, right? He's kind of a character that doesn't exist in a world where journalism isn't what it used to be, and you don't have a lot of Carl Kolchaks, so to speak, out there making their name on the streets. So, do you think that Kolchak could emerge as a modern figure in modern times at some point?
No, absolutely. I mean, he's just a great character. And like, we kind of said, he's very different than, Constantine. Constantine can fight his way out.
Right.
Yeah.
Carl gets chucked around like a rag doll, most of the time when he tries to fight. So, yeah.
I think that adds something to the idea of Kolchak, that he doesn't have, like, in quotes, powers. Like, he's putting himself on the line, not just his gig, not just trying to satisfy curiosity, but for the story, he's willing to risk his safety and well-being. He's going up against monsters. He's going up against things that do have powers, that are malevolent, that will kill him. And he's still willing to go in there for us.
Right.
He's a hero, that Kolchak.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's what makes him so easy to adapt, right? And it's why it's wonderful to see it in the 70s, but could also see a version of Kolchak emerging on the page that would be akin to something more modern we'd see. And my last question for you both is, this isn't the first time either of you have kind of adapted something of a legacy character of sorts. What kind of precautions do you take, or do you put in place for yourselves when you're thinking about creating within those parameters of something that's existed for a while, in some cases many iterations, like the classic monsters have?
Well, kind of like what Steve said a moment ago, you have a low-tech world to remind myself continuously, and I did this with Blackula too, to remind myself the world that I'm actually in, and to stay true to the character. I love Richard Matheson, who wrote the movies of the week, and I sort of use that as a template in the back of my mind as the perfect Kolchak for me, and to stay within the boundaries and the rules that were already established before I came along.
Yeah, I've worked with a lot of other people's properties and things like that, and what I generally do is I just immerse myself in it. And there's nothing more fun than watching, like I'm a huge Matheson fan, so I have no problem rewatching those first two movies over and over again, and just hearing that voice, get that voice in your head, and once it's there, the dialogue and the narration just writes itself.
It has a rhythm. It's like music.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he does have a particular cadence to his talk. And, I was talking with Joe Lansdale actually over the weekend, and he mentioned we were talking about Joe Matheson, and he's had such an amazing impact on so many things that very few folks would realize. You mentioned the Kolchak episodes of the week. That's just a part of what his contribution was to the overall genre as a whole. So I think you all are following not only in great footsteps, but with the right shoes on in tow, with the talent you both bring to these properties. So just want to say thank you both, Steve and Rodney, for the time today. And a reminder to everyone watching this, please go and support the project on Kickstarter. You have until the 8th of November to do so. There's a bunch of different options. I myself signed up for the 4 comic books. I like to have the tactile ones, plus the bonus 4th wraparound. So please go and check that out and be on the lookout for Monstrous Books for this work as well as others. Thank you, gentlemen, for the time.
Thank you.